Hey guys, welcome back. Charles Damiano from the Bruce Lee Collection, and we have a very exciting episode lined up for you today. I'm here with a friend of mine, Alex Richter, also known as the Kung Fu Genius. I know a lot of you follow his podcast and YouTube channel as well, and I'm fortunate to have him here today in my Bruce Lee room, and we're going to find out a little bit about Alex. He's going to give us a little bio, a background on him, how he was inspired by Bruce Lee, some of the collectibles that he's going to share with us here today, and we're going to just talk all things Bruce Lee, including some of the first generation students that he's met along the way in his path to learning more about Bruce Lee. So let's get to it, guys. So Alex, thank you for coming here today, man.
Thank you for having me here. This room looks like my teenage brain exploded onto the walls and became a room. This is exactly what it looks like.
Well,
here.
thank you, man. This is my man cave. This is what I put together for myself, where I come and just spend some time and enjoy myself in my Bruce Lee space here.
This is very cool. Love it.
I appreciate it. So yeah, so I wanted the guys to get to know you today. I know you have a very extensive background. I've been to your Wing Chun school, which by the way is incredible, which we'll talk a little more at the end of the show. But I want them to learn more about Alex Richter. I know we all followed our own path and how we got introduced to Bruce and how he's inspired us to continue on a path of, becoming better people. So
sure.
How did it start for you? Why don't you give us a little bit about your background? I know you got heavily into the Wing Chun, and how did it all start from you, and when did you first start studying, and was that inspired by Bruce Lee?
So my origin story with martial arts sounds like kind of a bad 80s martial arts movie.
Okay.
So I was kind of tormented and bullied by a neighbor. And very young, maybe 7, 8 years old. And he was actually 1 or 2 years younger than me, but he was one of those like big kids. He was like way bigger than his pay grade, right? And we were like fighting over some toy, and he took one of my toys and basically said if I wanted to have it back, I needed to fight him for it. And I went to go grab it, and he just punched me right in the mouth. And he ended up knocking out one of my baby teeth.
Not a good experience. How old
I was
were you?
like maybe 7 years old, something like that, right? And I was so upset and so angry, and I went home and I was crying, and and I told my mom. That was around the time, or at least after the Karate Kid had come out. So that was like the only martial art I knew of, right? It was like karate, right? So I go, Mom, sign me up for karate, right? And there happened to be a karate school like literally 2 blocks away from where I grew up in New Jersey. I started training there. I loved it. Funny thing is, the guy who knocked out my tooth, I ended up punching him in the face and getting my revenge, like I said, like kind of like a bad 80s action movie. And he joined the karate school and we became friends.
Wow, look at that.
And it was shortly after that, and I've told this story many times on the Kung Fu Genius podcast. I was homesick from school one day, and my dad rented Enter the Dragon so I could watch at home while I was, recuperating from, whatever cold or flu.
What a great dad. There's a lot of people that I've interviewed who was first introduced that way, either an uncle or a dad said, hey, we're going to sit down today and watch a Bruce Lee movie, and they pull out Enter the Dragon.
Absolutely. My dad is German. My dad's name is Manfred. He's as German as they come. And so growing up, there was never like a problem with like nudity and stuff like that. So my dad looks at this thing, oh, it's rated R. Mom, my son likes martial arts. Oh, there's nudity in it. That's okay.
Let's watch it.
He gets the movie for me, right? And I remember, because I think at that time I had just seen The Karate Kid, and I had just seen, obviously what I was learning in the karate school. And then I saw Enter the Dragon, and it was like, what is this? And just seeing Bruce... I feel almost a bit intimidated. He's like right behind me, overlooking me from the very same movie too. And just seeing him in the way that he moved and just the power that he had on screen. And, as an 8-year-old, just having that just burned into your mind, that like the potential of a human and what you're able to do. Yeah. And that was... And from that moment on, I was like, I don't want to do karate anymore. I want to do kung. It was like the moment in Way of the Dragon where they take off their karate gis. We don't want to do karate anymore, right? But the problem was in Central Jersey, there's like no kung fu.
Yeah. What year was that?
So this has to be, this is mid-80s, so I want to say 85, 86, something like that. So I grew up in Central Jersey. There was just karate and taekwondo. And maybe judo was the most exotic thing, right? But you weren't going to find kung fu anywhere.
Yeah, I have a question for you. So why do you think Bruce Lee left the kind of impact he did on people? Like, I was like you. I was in awe when I first saw it. And it's, you see a lot of actors and people on screen like Stallone and Arnold, and you say, wow, this was a great movie and this was good, but you don't leave going, this has just made the biggest impact in my life. I got to learn more about this. What do you think was it about Bruce that, like, why was he so captivating?
Well, I think that it was, one, he was unique in many respects. He's really the only Chinese male to really lead in a film like that that became big in the States.
Yeah.
You've had it, I coincidentally enough, Jason Scott Lee, the guy who played Bruce Lee, was probably the next person to be, of Chinese descent to be a headliner in an American film. But it's so rare. And two, even to this day, I mean, you look at Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung and all the other Hong Kong people who've come after him, and they've definitely improved choreography and stunts and all that stuff from that time. But one, Bruce was the first, and two, there was just a certain way about the way he did it, the way he moved, the looks that he had, that intensity, his musculature. It was the total package.
It really was.
Yeah,
that's a great way to explain it.
That's I think part of his appeal. And like I mentioned to you, and I mentioned other people, for those of us, you're a little bit older than me. I'm a little bit younger than you. So my joining martial arts came in the 80s.
Yeah.
So for people in my generation, which is only slightly after yours, barely, okay? The day you find out about Bruce Lee is simultaneously the coolest and worst day.
Yeah.
Because it's also the day you found out that he died. It's like when I meet people who are older, let's say Hector Martinez, something like that, who knew about Bruce Lee before Bruce Lee passed. Yeah. Like, for me, that's amazing because that was not at all my experience. My experience was, look at this amazing guy. And then, hey, Mom, what's up with this Bruce Lee? Oh, he died a really long time ago. And it was like,
it just takes the wind out of you.
And it's all in the same day. And for people in my generation, these things happened on the same day.
Yeah, that's pretty intense, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, mine was like you said. I was in the 70s. He was alive. I saw him in Fist of Fury, Chinese Connection. And then I seen the paper that he's passed. So it was it was a big blow to me at the time because you were getting so into it. He had so much potential. He added so much excitement and joy to your life as a kid growing up. You wanted to emulate him. You started joining schools, and all of a sudden, he's gone. He just takes the wind out of you. But
absolutely.
I guess everyone experiences that in different stages, right?
Yeah,
and then you find out he's passed, and it's like, but he still stays with you, man, all these years in your life.
Yeah, I think a year or two. So there was no Kung Fu in Central Jersey. So I was reading Inside Kung Fu, Black Belt magazines, reading every article. Okay, he learned a style called Wing Chun. He did something called Jeet Kune Do. And just getting books and starting to read more and more about it, but having to kind of teach myself a little bit about Wing Chun and Jeet Kune Do through the books. And I remember shortly after that, we went to Epcot Center, like maybe a year or two later. Yeah. And they had, in Epcot Center at that time, they have like all the different countries. And you go there, and they had China. And I remember we were in the gift shop there, and they had the Chinese style, what we used to call a Kung Fu uniform, although it's just Tong Zhong, Chinese style clothing from that period, right? And I saw they had like, it was like all black with the frog buttons.
Oh, I love that.
And it was like, so, I was allowed to get one thing. And I was like, what do you want? I'm like, I want that Chinese Kung Fu uniform right there.
Was it the black with the white cuffs and the white collar? Actually, or was it all black?
It was black with black frog buttons. Okay. So it was like, because the one with the white frog buttons on black.
A little too much.
It looked like Kung Fu Movie Extra.
Yeah.
But you don't look like the Star. The Star didn't wear that one. The extras wore that one, true. Right? And this was like an all black one. And I kind of begged and pleaded for my cousin to get me one. I remember it was $25, and she bought it for me. And that was, I used to wear that thing everywhere. It was the 80s, you could get away with it, right? I would wear jeans, a t-shirt, and then like I'd wear the jacket, and I'd roll up the sleeves and just walk around like that, right? And so
everyone wanted to be Bruce Lee, man. We all did.
Yeah, so then I see, The Last Dragon, right? Bruce Leroy, and I go like, this is literally the guy I'm trying to be, right?
Yeah.
The guy who's like into Bruce Lee, but in the modern era, right? And so
that was a great movie, by the way. That was a fun movie.
Fantastic movie.
And he did a great job, the guy who played Bruce Leroy.
Absolutely. So a few years of karate, and then I switched to Taekwondo with some legit, fresh off the boat Korean instructors who barely spoke any English. And then my family relocated to Seattle in 1992. Oh, wow. So I was about to start high school with all my friends in Jersey, and then my parents are like, great news, you're not going to high school with all your friends. We're moving to the opposite coast. And it was like, only thing in my mind, it was like, we're moving to Seattle. Bruce Lee was buried in Seattle. Okay, I can kind of get behind it.
I was just thinking that.
You know, but I was still, you know, because I was about to start high school with my friends, and it's a tough age.
Yeah, it is.
You know, so we relocated out west. I continued Taekwondo for a short time.
Did you get a chance to visit his grave when you moved out there? Or
Not
no?
right away.
Okay.
Because we lived in a suburb of Seattle, and I didn't yet have a car.
Right,
my parents were not going to drive me to some grave in Seattle, at that
point. Yep.
Even though I wanted to go. But I finished my Taekwondo black belt while I was in Seattle with the same association.
Yeah.
So I accomplished that. But I really wanted to learn something related to Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, when I was about 15, 16, in the town, the suburb that I was growing up in, there was a school. It was called the Kung Fu Club of Issaquah. Issaquah was the town I lived in.
Okay.
And I saw the words Wing Chun on and I was like, oh.
There it is.
And it wasn't like I had to go into some secret basement with a secret handshake. It was like a brick and mortar commercial school.
Yeah.
And I was like, what?
What?
And I walk in there, I meet this tall oak tree of a man named Sifu Johan. And he's like, looks every bit the part, and he explained to me a little bit about what Wing Chun is, and he demonstrates like the chain punches, and I'm like, whoa, I want to do this. And that was finally my moment years later where I could tear off the Taekwondo gi and go, now I'm going to do Chinese Kung Fu. And that style of Wing Chun was not a traditional style of Wing Chun.
Okay.
It was actually Sifu Johan's teacher learned from both Ed Hart and James DeMille.
Oh, wow.
So actually it was a non-classical Kung Fu style. It was essentially this pre-Jeet Kune Do era Wing Chun. So we didn't actually learn like the Siu Nam Tao and the traditional stuff because we were basically doing what Bruce Lee was kind of teaching at that time.
DeMille and Hart, which
wasn't really, it wasn't yet Jeet Kune Do, but it wasn't the traditional Wing Chun.
It was Wing Chun Do.
Yeah, it was something in between. Right? So I started learning that. How cool was that like I finally get to learn Wing Chun, and even though it's not traditional Wing Chun, it's Wing Chun from the line of Bruce Lee's students in Seattle.
How special is that, man?
So at that point, it was like 2 or 3 years into living in the Seattle area. I was like, okay, I can finally get behind living in this area, because I hated the Pacific Northwest. It's like cloudy 9 months out of the year, right? And everyone talks about how it rains, and people from there say, well, you actually get more annual rainfall in New York. Yes, but Seattle is 9 months of slow water torture drizzle.
Oh, I hate that.
And so it just kills your mood.
Takes you right down.
But there was Wing Chun there. There was Bruce Lee's Wing Chun. And when I got my driver's license, well, I had gone before, but the moment I got my driver's license, I would go to Bruce Lee's grave once a week.
Wow!
It's in Lakeview Cemetery, and it's on a part of, it's kind of at the end of what's known as Capitol Hill. But if you drive to the base right along the highway there's this set of stairs that goes up, and we were told like that's one of the most like the hardest set of stairs to run. And in fact, it was one of the tests for our Wing Chun school. We had to do like I forget what it was, but you had to do it like 10 times up and down, and you had to do it 2 at a time.
Wow.
Brutal. And so I used to go there and try to run, and then I realized like, oh, this is actually really close to Bruce Lee's grave. So I used to go and drive and park my car, and I used to run that thing 3 or 4 times. And then on the last one, I would go and I would run up to his grave, and I would spend time there with him. And oftentimes there were tourists, but sometimes you'd go there and there would be no one there.
Yeah.
And now his grave, like they kind of cordoned it off.
With the fencing.
And they have a bench and all this stuff. Back then it wasn't quite so fancy. In fact, I even went there. Brandon had already passed when I first went to his grave. But now, Brandon has the same size headstone like his father. But originally he just had a plot in the ground.
Oh, you went really early on.
And the first time I went there was still that. I had seen that old version, and it was still the old Bruce Lee grave where there had been some damage to the gravestone.
Wow. Yeah, I went with Linda Lee and during the memorial banquets, and they had the same size stones at the time, but they didn't have the fencing around it.
Yeah, that's new. I haven't seen it that way.
I'm not crazy about that. It seems really confining, and you have to wait online now to.
But I think they did it because everyone was stomping on everyone else's grave to go around.
I heard his grave is the most visited grave out there.
For sure.
Yeah.
I remember my first time going there because this was in the pre-internet days. Now, if you want to find Bruce Lee's grave, you just Google it. People tell you exactly how to get there. I only knew it was in Lakeview Cemetery, which is a relatively large cemetery, and there's a Chinese section there, but Bruce Lee is not in the Chinese section. There's all Cantonese people. He's like in his own section, but it was weird. I'm not a superstitious person. I'm not like a very religious or spiritual person. But the first time I went to Lakeview Cemetery, I walked in the entrance and I had no idea where his grave was. And I just walked in there and I just remember, I just looked up and just like in my heart, I'm like, it's right there. I don't know what it was.
You just felt that.
I just felt it. And like, I'm the least superstitious, wooey person you'll ever meet. And I remember I walked in a beeline right to it as if I knew exactly where it was.
Isn't that funny?
And I remember when I started to get close to it, because this, you know, I was already a teenager at that point, but I had been into Bruce Lee for a few years, and then it was like, I just remember my hands were shaking. I got kind of emotional. And then I would go there after that pretty much once a week, and I would just sit there and I'd stay there for 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's funny. You don't know the kind of feeling you're going to have when you're actually standing above his grave.
Yes.
And, you know, that's the closest, right, you've been to him.
Yes.
I felt that way, too.
Yeah.
And I was like, nervous going up to it because I'm like, wow, I'm actually going to be the closest you're ever going to be.
Yes.
But then it was a very surreal feeling. You actually... Yeah, it takes you back a little bit.
Absolutely. So that was a big thing for me to go there, spend some time with him, and I would just sit there in silence. I would just sit down in front of his grave, maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes. And I did that for years until I finally left Seattle. But that was like such a huge part of kind of, I don't know, I suppose now what would be the lore of the Kung Fu genius, right?
So did that experience, learning, you know, if you want to call it the Wing Chun Do version, and then how'd you get to the actual more traditional Wing Chun, and who was that from?
So I'm a huge nut in like whatever I get into, I go into these rabbit holes and like that, like not with the whole like drug letters or whatever. Like pretty soon I could probably get a degree in like illegal drug pharmacology because I've been studying this stuff like crazy, right? Because I get super obsessive. My wife knows anytime I get into something, she's like, oh no, now this is going to be the thing for the next 3 weeks, right? Because I'm going to have to find out everything about it until I've exhausted the topic. So I was doing non-classical Wing Chun, but I wanted to learn classical or traditional Wing Chun because I wanted to know two things. One, I wanted to know, you know, Bruce maybe didn't have a chance to learn the entire Wing Chun system. So I wanted to say, okay, I want to go and see what did Bruce not learn.
Right.
All right. And I also wanted to see, well, was what Bruce taught were basically his edits of the Wing Chun he had learned. I want to learn the original source material so I can then take a look at his edits and go, did these edits make sense? Or were these edits done because he still had not seen certain things? So I was kind of making myself the guinea pig. So I started to buy lots of books on traditional Wing Chun and buying videos. I bought all of Augustine Fong's tapes. I bought everything. Right? Videotapes, consuming. And the traditional Wing Chun was... there were some things that were similar to what I was learning, and there were some things that were very different. The forms, the turning, the movement, it was still like, that was all very foreign to me. And I would go and visit different Wing Chun schools and try it out. And for the most part, I wasn't too impressed because the non-classical Wing Chun that we were learning used very heavy forward pressure with the leg forward, different from the traditional Wing Chun. And I would do Chi Sao with one of these more classical guys, and I would just kind of push through them, and I'd be like, this isn't okay. So I think maybe Bruce Lee was right. All right, maybe maybe it was the right way
because
to go.
He had more of that forward motion, right?
With
forward
the leg,
energy,
with the leg forward. It wasn't so much
forward.
based on turning and shifting, so much as kind of driving through.
Forward. Yeah, and that's how Jesse's power was when you did 100%. Jesse. I felt 100%. That in him too. I'm like, where is this energy coming from? It was like incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was Bruce's version, right?
Yes, and for a few years I was like, okay, well, I think Bruce's edits really did make sense.
Yeah.
And then I kept hearing about the Learning Wing Chun system, which spelled WTTSUN, right? And I'm like, and I heard that they had a lot of schools in Germany, and like there's this one fighter, and his name's Emin Bostepe, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay.
He came out in a lot of magazines back in the 90s.
Yeah.
Every cover he was on.
Yeah.
Was he his like main pupil at the time?
Sifu Emin is a grand student of Learning, and he was like the big superstar in Germany at that time, famously because of his clash with William Cheung in the mid-'80s. And so I'm like, okay, well, these are some kind of classic, say, Hong Kong traditional Wing Chun guys who seem to also be able to fight. So I want to see what these guys do. So I went to Germany because my father's German, and I bought a few magazines, and they had all these books on learning Wing Chun, but it was in German. I couldn't speak German at the time, but I still ordered all the books. I got all these books in German, and I had a German word book, and this is what a psycho I am, and I would just open it, and I would like read, and I would look in the word book. I got a book called Vom Zweikampf, On Single Combat by Sifu Keith Kanspecht, who's Sifu Emin Bostet's teacher. But it was in German, I couldn't read, but I literally had a German word book, and I'm just like, okay. And he was talking about Jesse Glover in that book, and talking about Jack Dempsey and all these things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, a traditional Wing Chun style that makes reference to Jesse Glover and all these kind of guys. And so eventually I found a WT, Learning Wing Chun guy, in Vancouver, Canada, which is like a few hours drive from Seattle. There was no WT in Seattle. So I'm like, all right, I drove up across the border, went into Vancouver, saw this relatively unassuming, you know, Learning WT guy. He was a German guy. He had learned in Germany. And I told him, I've done non-classical Wing Chun. I've done all this stuff. And he seemed very like, okay, like he didn't care.
Yeah.
I'm telling him, I'm a black belt in Taekwondo. I did non-classical Wing Chun with these guys like they learned from, you know, James DeMille and blah, 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 and all these kind of things. He's like, good. He's like, okay. You know, and he goes, okay, well, you go ahead and attack me. I'll show you what I do. And I'm like, you mean like throw a punch or kick? He's like, no, I don't care, whatever.
Wow.
And I remember going like, because normally, but to be fair, even in the non-classical Wing Chun I was doing, they also had that same attitude. But I had never really seen that attitude from traditional Wing Chun guys. Because normally the Wing Chun guys will go, okay, let's do chi sao, and then they'll say, oh, you're wrong, and then they'll do something to show you wrong. But they'll never say, okay, just take a swing, do whatever. And then show you what they can do.
And this guy said that?
And that guy did that. And I was like, okay. So already I had respect for this guy. Amazing. And I remember, I'm like, all right, so I decided not to attack him with any kind of Wing Chun stuff because I'm like, I want to see what he does against other stuff.
Yeah.
I'm a Taekwondo black belt. So I'm like, I'm just going to head kick him.
No, you said that?
Yeah, it's like at the beginning of the movie where the guy's getting flying through the air and he's like, let me tell you how I got here, right? And I remember I go to fire a kick at him and like I was midway setting up the kick and he just stepped in, his hand was on my face and he just pushed me into the wall.
Wow.
He just closed the gap like that.
He just intercepted your thought pattern, man.
Yeah. Ooh, this time I intercept your emotional tenseness, right?
This can be compared to your left jab in boxing, except it's much more damaging.
I see. Well, speaking of a left jab.
Oh, this time I intercept your emotional tenseness. You see, from your thought to your fist, how much time was lost.
Not much.
And so, no, he stepped in. I was like, and it was like, you know, I was a stubborn teenager. Like, and I was like, let me do that again. You know what I mean? It was like I wasn't convinced, right?
Yeah.
And then so I tried to get the same result. And then we kind of did a couple things where we exchanged, and he was able to completely nullify what I had done before. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. And that's what set me on the path to doing WT. And then eventually, there was no WT Learning Wing Chun in Seattle that really was high level. So I shipped myself off to Germany, which was where the headquarters was. They had headquarters in Hong Kong, headquarters in Germany, because they had an old castle that they converted into a training gym for instructors.
Wow, that must have been cool.
And you could train there 5 days a week, 6 hours a day.
Wow.
Full time. And not knowing much German, I shipped myself, I quit my job at BMW because I didn't go to college. I got a job for BMW motorcycles, paid me really well. I didn't even know anything about motorcycles, and I somehow managed to get that job. I was earning good money, and then I'm like, I want to do Wing Chun full time. I shipped myself off to Germany for 3 years.
Wow.
Trained 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. And became like a junior level instructor.
Nice.
And, I did not want to go back to Seattle, so I came back. I met Sifu Learning in Germany, and he says, why don't you teach in New York City? I originally wanted to teach in Miami because of the weather.
Yeah.
And he goes, no, we have an opening in New York. You should teach in New York City. And then that's when I went there, and I've been teaching Wing Chun since 2002. When I started teaching, I became a student of Sifu Learning directly through private lessons and seminars, and also some other Hong Kong instructors.
Wow.
So I learned the European system first, and then I learned directly from the Hong Kong guys while I was an instructor, because I continued to train while I was an instructor. Most of what you really learn is after you start teaching anyway. And that's what I've been doing, and next year will be the 20th anniversary of City Wing Chun.
Wow. Well, I visited your school. You have a very impressive school.
Thank you.
And so you started it in 2002?
No, so I had already been doing some WT already in 1998. I was training with that instructor
When
in
did
Vancouver.
you open your school?
Oh, I didn't open the school until 2002.
Okay. So you've been there almost 20 years now.
Yeah, it'd be 20 years. So I had been doing WT before I started teaching. I had been doing it for just shy of 5 years, but 3 of those years was 5 days a week, 6 hours a day. That was all I was doing. Wow. So I really trained intensively as an instructor.
So would you say all this came about because of Bruce Lee, following this path of Wing Chun and dedicating your life for 20 years, and you kind of getting off your path of sales in BMW and just saying, I want to make this my life?
Yeah, if
Wow.
it were not for Bruce Lee, I would not have the career that I have right now. I would not be...
Stay tuned for part 2 as we continue our interview with Sifu Alex Richter, also known as the Kung Fu Genius, and learn how Bruce Lee's influence and inspiration leading him to study Wing Chun Kung Fu has changed his life forever.
Odds don't hit back.